This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are longtime Falcons analyst Jarvis Davis, Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman, and 11 Alive anchor Maria Martin. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. And our Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So they have their man, but what does that mean for what's next? And he said at the end of his season presser that they're going to have to make sure that they're effective in draft, free agency, and extensions. But what does that mean for him? And how important is it for said person on whether or not the Falcons run a 4-3, 3-4 hybrid, or what kind of defense they run? And of course, it's never too early to talk about the draft because there are already 277 mock drafts out there for where the Falcons will go. But first, let's talk about what we really came here to do. Matt Eberflus, Steve Wilks, Grady Brown, Derek Ansley, Lou Anarumo, and Wink Martindale were all considered, but at the end of the day, the gig was given to a familiar name to all of us. So, Jarvis, as you know, the Falcons announced sometime this weekend when all of us were doing something else that they found their defensive coordinator in the name of one Jeff Ulbrich.
It is real.
So now that you've had an opportunity, about 5 days or so, to really give this hire some thought, was this the best move for this organization? And was this a shocking move to you?
Absolutely not. To answer your question, it was not shocking at all. Because when you think about what Raheem Morris's kind of motive has been when it comes to hiring his assistant coaches, it's like, hey, familiarity is where he falls into that category, right? That's what he loves and understands. And that's one of the reasons why Jimmy Lake was the defense coordinator, although I did not agree with it because I feel like having two first-year coordinators was kind of a big task to kind of oversee in your first year as a head coach because you were the promise was to get to the playoffs, and of course you did not do that. So for him to hire a guy like Jeff Ulbrich, I'm not too surprised from a familiarity standpoint, but I don't necessarily feel like it was the right fit, for me, because I felt like they needed the balance of a guy who's willing to play some, send pressure, and a guy who is willing to, play some zone coverage, and kind of mix it up a little bit. I thought Steve Wilks was that guy. I personally dream type situation, and we talked about this on Locked On Falcons with Aaron. And as far as Wink Martindale being my dream scenario because he willing to take those chances, and sometimes it's kind of boom or bust type situation, and I love that type of aggressiveness and from a mindset standpoint. But I think overall, I wasn't surprised, and I feel like this is a typical move by the Falcons organization. So for those reasons, I felt like you probably should have gone a little bit outside of the box in a guy like Steve Wilks. Yeah.
So, Aaron, Jarvis brings up a third question. So I'm going to give you and Maria both an A, a B, and a C. So take us back to last week and first tell us about your dream hire, if you will. And of course, whether or not you were surprised that if Jeff Ulbrich wasn't your dream hire, that he was the dream hire for the Falcons. And do you feel like overall that was the best move?
Last week, to me, the top three candidates I wanted to see the Falcons hire were Dennis Allen, Patrick Graham, or it was kind of I'll say four, Lou Anarumo or Steve Wilks. I thought those were the four best defensive coordinator options on the market. And the Falcons only interviewed two of those guys, two of those guys. Sorry. Yeah. And they went with a different direction. So I don't think Jeff Ulbrich was the right choice. I don't really know what Jeff Ulbrich brings to the table, just because I know he had some success in New York, but like I think the general consensus is that style of defense was Robert Saleh's sort of style of defense. I think Jeff Ulbrich deserves credit for calling that defense and having the success they had there. But it is one of those things where it's like, I don't look at Jeff Ulbrich and what he did in Atlanta or New York or UCLA or any of these places and say, what is it that Jeff Ulbrich believes in defensively? Mm-hmm. And so to me, this move just kind of feels like a status quo move for the Falcons to go from Jimmy Lake to Jeff Ulbrich. And it's like, I guess we're going to just run the Raheem Morris defense, which is fine. You know, Raheem has had success as a defensive coach in the NFL, but like, you know, I don't think the Raheem Morris defense is particularly great. I feel like some of these other options that the Falcons could have hired would have brought a little bit more value to the table in that. And I don't remember what the third part of the question was, T.
Well, you kind of answered it intertwined in your answer, because I was asking if you were surprised, and I think you kind of answered that in the space of your.
No, I was not surprised. I think Ulbrich was the betting favorite. My only surprise was that they announced it on Saturday when I was.
You were surprised about that, but okay.
I was trying to enjoy my birthday. That was my birthday last
week. Oh, happy birthday!
Happy
belated birthday. So, like, I was just like, why are you doing this,
Mr. Nose?
Like, I'm out and about. I'm trying to have fun, you know. I might not have been 100% sober at the time when the Falcons announced the move. So now I got to get on camera and talk about it. So it was one of those things where I was a little upset about that. And so it was surprising to me that the Falcons would decide to ruin my birthday of all days.
I don't know why you're so surprised. 3:01 p.m., exactly a week before that, they told you that the guy who Jeff Ulbrich was replacing was out of there.
Yeah.
Just saying, there's a pattern here, but it's all good because, like you said, I don't know that any of us were surprised. But Maria, maybe you were surprised. Ultimately, take us back to last week, your dream candidate for this gig, whether or not you were surprised, whether or not you think Jeff Ulbrich's the right hire.
No, I mean, I wasn't surprised. I had heard really early on that he was exactly the person that Raw wanted to hire, and that was confirmed by the fact that they had 7 interviews over the course of a week, all of which were not in person, and they landed on Jeff very quickly. So that was really confirmed that it's Raw's guy. You don't even need confirmation for that. These are all coaches that stem from the DQ coaching tree, and they're all very good friends. They're all very close. Of course, they've all gone off and done different things, but, I kind of agree with Aaron in the sense where it's what does Jeff Ulbrich really bring to the table? You don't really know. I mean, you got glimpses of it in New York, obviously. He was the interim head coach for 11 games. And so you're saying, okay, was it him totally in control at that point? Was Robert Saleh really in charge of the defense before that? You don't really know how much of each played into that. And so when he was with the Falcons for as long as he was, he really wasn't all hands on deck for the entirety of the defense. And that was a long time ago at this point. His career has changed. He's gone to different places. And of course, going back to the Raw hire, that was also kind of the criticism around Raheem Morris. It was, is this going to be the same thing we saw when he was with the Falcons, or the same thing that we saw in his first tenure as a head coach a million years ago when he was in Tampa? And so there is a little bit of an unknown with Jeff. That would not have been my first choice. It would not have been my second. It would not have been my third. It's not an indictment on Jeff. I think Jeff's an amazing person, brings a lot of energy. Players really love him. Grady Jarrett loves Jeff. But I think that there were other coaches that would have brought a fresh perspective into the building, which I think at this point is incredibly important. I mean, you're looking at a season that was perhaps one of the most disappointing in recent memory for the Falcons, just because of the sheer expectations in the preseason. And you fall so flat. You need fresh eyes. You need fresh perspective. I like the Lou Anarumo pick. Steve Wilkes would have been a nice addition. I love Derek Ansley, partially because I'm pretty biased to that. He's a Troy guy. We know him very well. And I think that a lot of people who don't know Derek Ansley should. So familiarize yourself with him because he's very well respected around the NFL at this point. I was excited that Derek got an interview, although I knew that there was no chance of him getting the job because Jeff was in that mix. But I do think that there were other options to maybe switch things up and not go back to status quo, which is what we've seen the Falcons do, especially defensively over the last decade plus.
Yeah. And you think about exactly where Maria was going with that, Jarvis, and the fact that no one was shocked that Ulbrich was the ultimate hire. But like we were saying in our group text immediately following the Falcons officially making the announcement, familiarity breeds contempt. That's not our saying. That's just a saying overall. And that was the first thought I had, not because of us, because like Maria mentioned, we've all had interactions with or know about Jeff Ulbrich, and he's a stand-up human being. So it's not Jeff the human. It's the familiarity breeding contempt of someone that we've already seen before, which is the same conversation that fans were having when they found out Raheem Morris was going to be the head coach for the Falcons. So that said, how do you think the fans are feeling about this? And how do you think ultimately at this point, they probably know that these guys are friends, they're boys, they're close. But what does this do for the fan base? A fan base that, like Maria said, pretty much saw a team underperform. All of the expectations were pretty much not met. And now you're going to go back and seemingly get someone who's sort of like a retread as opposed to doing something else. How did that make the fans feel?
I would assume if I'm a fan of the team, and which I am, I grew up watching this team and being a fan, early at an early age, and I think, and for some strange reason, I continued that as an adult. I don't know why,
Bless
but
your heart.
it is what it is. Like I ride for my city,
Unfortunate.
so I take everything that comes with that, and hold it proudly. But I think just from that aspect of it, right? I have the objective part, but from a fan standpoint, I feel it feels like it brings a question to my mind, and the question is, what is going to make this any different? Like, how's this going to be different from last year? And how's it going to be any different from, when he took over as a DC when Dan Quinn was fired, because it was pretty mid. Now I can make a case for, hey, look at the players on that squad. It was a reason why, Dan Quinn got fired, right? Just from a personnel standpoint and all of those things. But I think just from a fan perspective, which is fair, it's totally fair to question this hire. Now, granted, I like Jeff Ulbrich. I respect him as a coach. I've had some interaction with him. He's a football dude, and I like football dudes. I know
Played
my guys,
linebacker, all those good things.
linebacker, former player, like all of that stuff matters in the locker room when he stands up in front of that room and commands it, right? So all of that stuff, that respect is automatically there. However, your relationship with Ra and the results when you were with Ra, and not necessarily getting credit for what happened in New York, all of those things are fair criticism, right? So now it's just all about them proving it. They have to go out there and prove it. But from a fan perspective, I understand all the questions. I get it. Totally get it.
Yeah, for me, like when you look at it from a fan perspective, it just feels like familiarity, and it's like, we're doing this again. Like, I remember when they brought Dirk Cutter back in 2019. It was like, we're doing this again. Like, what are we, right? And so it's like you're bringing the band back together from 2019 and 2020, where Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich sort of kind of spearheaded the defense in the second half of 2019 and throughout 2020. Yeah. And it's like, those were the glory days that we're bringing back. Like, I really miss that Kendall Sheffield and Tyler Davison era of Falcons football and Dante Fowler. And I'm just like, all right, cool, man. But I don't think that's something that is going to get fans excited, because oh man, we're bringing back the great days when the Falcons had like the 19th best defense in the NFL, which would be a big improvement for this current defense. Sure. But it's like, that's what we're aiming for, the 19th best defense. I think fans I know fans are very tired of basically these sort of low bars that the Falcons seem to always be looking for on the defense side of the ball.
I can't remember which of you I was talking to this about, but I think one thing, and fans probably feel this more than anybody else, is this hire kind of accelerates the timeline of a hot seat, whether you're Raheem Morris or Terry Fontenot. And fans are frustrated. And I totally understand. And I hear it, because you don't want history to repeat itself with this team as it has for years and years on the defensive side of the football. And you're looking around and you're thinking, look at all of these names that you guys interviewed. There were 6 very, very well-respected candidates in the NFL, and not that Jeff isn't, it's just he's been here. So you already know kind of what you're going to get, but hopefully he proves us wrong. He has the opportunity now to do that, but we've been talking about that for so long. It just feels so redundant. And so if you're a fan, you're so frustrated and so jaded by what the Falcons have done and going back to comfortable positions in terms of their relationships and who they know. And all of those things are important in the National Football League. It's important in your life. But when your relationships don't work the first time around, going back to that the second time is really going to make some people feel some type of way. And I understand that. So, if I'm a fan, I'm incredibly frustrated. As somebody that covers the team, I'm incredibly frustrated. So, I hope that Jeff goes out there and proves all of us wrong. But to be fair, in order to do that, you have to have better players on the defensive side of the ball and figure out what the heck you want to do. So it's kind of a two-headed monster in that way.
Indeed, which also kind of brings up the question of what does success under Ulbrich look like? We'll talk about it when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Gametime. Now, I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. And one of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. The energy and excitement were unforgettable. And Gametime now has made it even easier to get tickets to your favorite events like concerts with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I was looking for tickets for a game, and I was using the Gametime app. And with the Gametime Picks, I was able to find amazing deals and could even see the view from my seat before buying. The super deal was particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And the best part, hey, you might actually appreciate being able to be right at that 50-yard line and see your favorite team play. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download that Gametime app today, because what time is it? It is game time. So, Aaron, we kind of thrown around loosely the whole topic of what success looks like. And granted, definitely want to talk about whether or not the actual hiring of Jeff Ulbrich will determine what the Falcons have in terms of success in 2025. But first, I think I kind of want to define what success looks like for the Falcons. So tell me, for you, what does that look like for the Falcons as far as the defense goes, success for the defense? And then what does that mean for what success looks like for this team overall?
Well, I mean, obviously success is significant improvement. The question is just how significant is significant, right? It's like, is it going from where the Falcons are now, which is probably in the bottom 10 defenses in the NFL, or probably definitely in the bottom 10 defenses in the NFL.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And breaking out of that group, that's one form of success, but is that going to be good enough? Because we know that, generally speaking, because the expectations are that the Falcons are going to be a playoff team, right? And to be a playoff team, you usually have to be a little bit better than that, unless you're going to have like an elite offense. And while we are optimistic about what this offense is going to be, they do have a first-year quarterback and a second-year play caller. And so we'll see if this offense is going to be the sort of elite offense that they look like in Week 18, but didn't quite consistently look that way in other games. So that's going to be a big question. So I feel like, this team is probably, their success is going to be offensive driven, but you want your defense to be sort of complementary. That's always been what Raheem Morris's most successful defenses have been. They have been complementary to a high-powered offense. And you saw glimpses of that 2 years ago in Atlanta at the beginning of that season with Ryan Nielsen. Unfortunately, the offense was not very high-powered during that time, but the defense definitely played the sort of brand of complementary football that you needed. You saw glimpses of that this past season, early in the season with some of the success they were having, where the defense was, with the Oreo defense, the bend but don't break, was like, just wait till the last 5 minutes of the game, and then the defense will show up and make the plays that they need to in order to win the game. So that, to me, is one measure of success, but it feels like that has been consistently the sort of low bar that the Falcons have set for a decade at this point in time. And I think going back to what we talked about previously with the fans and frustration, I think fans are just like, can we get actually a good defense? But at this stage, that feels like wishful thinking at this stage. So it's just kind of like, just be good enough to win football games. And, this is the state of life that we live in as Falcon fans and people that cover the team.
So Aaron is still on the fence of to be determined what the definition of success might look like. But for you, Maria, when you think about success for this defense specifically, and then for this team in general, now that Jeff Ulbrich is in place, what would that sort of look like for you? What would be some of the characteristics for you to say, okay, now this feels like a successful defense, a good defense, a maybe step above bend, don't break Oreo defense?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about what a good defense looks like, I think we have to curb expectations a little bit. This Falcons team defensively throughout the entire history of the franchise just really hasn't been that great. When you talk about consistency and the numbers, they've really not been a top 5 defense since the late 70s. That's crazy. So I think to expect this defense to all of a sudden look drastically different with the change of a defensive coordinator, I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that this defense just completely changes overnight. However, I do think that measuring success is going to come from the draft this year. Terry really has not put emphasis on that side of the ball in terms of high draft picks. We'll get into all of what that means with the NFL draft because they have less draft picks than they probably want, although I think they're going to be more later. We can go on a tangent about this. For me, being near the bottom of nearly every statistic defensively just obviously is not going to cut it. And no matter how good your offense is going to be, and I think Aaron made a really good point, you have to still remember it's a young quarterback, second-year play caller. All of those things are correct. However, I do think obviously they're steps ahead of the defense on the offensive side of the football. But for defense, get out of that mantra of being 31st in sacks and pass rate pressure and pass rush pressure, all of those things. I think if you take at least a couple of steps forward, you're trending in the right direction, but don't have the expectation that all of a sudden this is going to be a top 15 defense in the NFL. I don't think that that's realistic, especially with the players that you have. They're probably going to change under scheme when it comes to Jeff Ulbrich, which they've fluctuated. They've learned to be kind of flexible in that the last couple of years just because of the people that have rotated in and out. But Jeff is going to bring something different to the table schematically. So for me, the measure of success is seeing glimpses of what we saw after the bye week. And I'm not talking about the Carolina Panthers game. Forget that happened because that was trash. But if you look at the first couple of games after the bye week happened, the defense really took a step forward, and that's really what you want to look at. But I don't think expecting this defense to go from 31st in sacks to like 20th is really, that's not real. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. And what about for you, Jarvis? Level setting expectations for success.
Yes.
Especially to just focus on the defense, if you will, because I think we kind of have all said what we think success will be for the offense and how that's going to contribute to the team overall. So stay in the lane of defense. What levels that expectations on what success means for 2025?
Well, I'm all about tangible steps, right? Because that's the only way you can succeed in life. It's tangible things. First off, hire a hell of a defensive line coach, because when you think about the success, I love when Aaron brought it up earlier about Ryan Nielsen and the success that he had. Basically made, turn lemons into lemonade. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was able to work that out. And I even go back to when Marco Emmanuel was a defensive coordinator. Those two guys have something similar in common, right? Marquand Manuel's high energy, culture, hey, Mother Blanca, like you need to get your stuff together type guy, right? Ryan Nielsen, same thing. Super intense dude in
Yeah.
meetings. If you talk to any player that was here in 2023, the first thing to come out of their mouth, intense. This dude is super intense. And guess what his base is? Defensive line. So I feel like the hire of who this defensive line coach who this defensive line coach will be for this team is going to make a lot of difference because he's going to be that level set guy, that guy that's kind of set the tone because we understand what Ulbrich brings to the table, and there are some guys who are familiar with him, but he's going to have to bring a guy here that's going to be like, all right, man, the defense starts with us. Our success and what we look like and what we're able to do and accomplish on the field starts with this group right here. And I'm going to make sure I lay out how we get there, right? So I think hiring a defensive line coach and making sure that you get a guy that understands getting off blocks, understand how to teach that, how to convey that, how to consistently remind guys, hey man, get off your blocks, use your hands. We can't sit up here in two gap. Nobody does that in NFL anymore. I promise you. You can look around, look at all the tape you want, you won't find it. So I feel like getting that defensive line coach hire right and making sure that Ulbrich is aggressive and continue to reinforce that mindset that defensive line coach establishes.
Yeah, I can remember hearing someone say that if you could make an incremental step like 5 degrees from where you are and make that incremental step every time you have an opportunity, then eventually it's going to lead to success. But I like the fact that we're all kind of agreeing that there needs to be some semblance of level setting because, hey, according to Google, clearly communicating and ensuring everyone involved in a project, conversation, or situation has a shared understanding of the goals, the key facts, the deadlines, and etc. That's what level setting expectations is. So they're all going to need to get on the same page. I know, don't you love me wordsmithing? Raheem Morris, Jeff Ulbrich, that D-line coach, everybody on that defense. It's going to take them some time and some opportunity to get together and gel. Whereas to Maria's earlier point, Aaron's earlier point, and Jarvis, I know you agree, you've already kind of taken that 5 degree, 10 degree step because you had an opportunity to see Michael Penix Jr. on offense. You've had an opportunity to see what Zach Robinson can do on offense as well. They're going into year 2, so it should be more of an increase here. But I think just got to level set a little bit in terms of what the expectations are on the defensive side of the ball. But there won't be much level setting in terms of what the expectations are in the personnel you get to make this defense get to the successful side or the definition of success. We're going to talk about what that looks like in Next Up. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is very easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. We got some exciting championship games coming up in the NFL. Obviously, the AFC Championship game. Will Kansas City get an opportunity to go for the three-peat? Not if the Buffalo Bills have something to say about it. And the Eagles are looking for a rematch with said Kansas City Chiefs, but not if the Washington Commanders have something to say about it. So if you want to get those instant winnings, check out FanDuel.com and make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, Maria, we kind of alluded to it in that last segment, and I'll take you back to something that Terry Fontenot said at his end of season presser. Quote, we just have to make sure that we're as effective, whether it's the draft, free agency, extensions, everything that we're doing. We have to be effective with each one of those moves so we can put this team in a position to win. And like I said, you kind of alluded to it, you guys all did. And it's not just about Jeff Ulbrich. It's not just about the defensive line coach that the Falcons hire. What kind of personnel are they going to put on at the top of the season when we start talking about the top of free agency, when we start talking about getting closer to the draft? Is this Terry Fontenot's most important offseason for him to get it right in all of those spaces of where he puts this team as far as personnel goes?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't know if it would necessarily be his most important. I think that there's been a few where his measured success probably weighed a little bit heavier. However, I do think that people are paying attention more because of, again, what I said earlier, how flat they fell per expectations preseason. There's a lot of eyes and heat on Terry. And honestly, his press conference didn't go that great when we talked about Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix Jr. and the end of the season, so I think that there's a little bit more pressure in that aspect. To be honest, I think this draft is really interesting. I mentioned the 4 draft picks that the Falcons have, thanks to Kirk Cousins. 1 went away. He didn't mean to do that. But I do think that they can get some more draft capital if they were to move down away from that 15 spot. It's very possible they do that. Terry has never picked up a defensive player in the first round in his tenure in Atlanta. This is the perfect year to do so. This is such a defensive heavy draft. And there's so many good versatile players, right? There's so many good versatile players in this draft when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. And this is a year where you can really get yourself some guys that can make an immediate impact. Last year, when they picked up all of the defenders that they did in the draft, obviously not in the first round, they were really drafting towards the future. You've got some defensive linemen that are pretty old in terms of the NFL and longevity in your career. So you did have to look ahead in that sense. But it's deja vu at this point. Just as we were talking about when we were in Detroit for the NFL draft last year, they need an edge rusher. They need one really badly, but they also need a lot of different things. And so Terry's mantra when it comes to the draft has always been best available player. Well, it's possible that he picks best available player on the defense at that time. But I still think that there's so many needs on the defensive side of the football. You really can't go wrong. You just need to make sure that you get a guy that can have an immediate impact. Don't draft for the future at this point in that first round spot.
Ooh, I think that Maria actually gave Terry Fontenot an out so that he could stick with his little BPA mantra, but it's BPA on defense at that particular time where you have that draft pick in the first round, as opposed to saying position of need. So we'll go ahead and call it BPA asterisk for going forward. And maybe that will allow us to just keep being optimistic about the possibility of him going for a defensive player the first round. Although there is skepticism from the guy in the bottom, well, he's to my right, so I was like bottom right corner. But I feel like this is one of those crazy things, Jarvis, where Maria said it right, except I want to say we put it on repeat, Maria. So last year was the most important. Then the year before that was the most important.
It's always the most important. It's the NFL. Exactly. Every year is the most important.
Right. But I feel like maybe for him, the reason, Jarvis, that it feels like this is the most important offseason is not only because of the expectations that we had for Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morrison, this entire regime this past season, but I also think it's because the verdict is still out on whether or not Terry Fontenot has drafted well, because people are looking at Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson when they think about the round 1 picks and all of those offensive picks on that side of the ball, right? And then you look at Richie Grant, Arnold Ebiketie, Troy Anderson, Bergeron. Those are his second round picks. Jalen Mayfield, Desmond Ridder, D'Angelo Malone, Zach Harrison in the third round. I'm not going to even go past that because at that point, it's probably going to go down a rabbit hole. That's why I'm not even going past the third round. Yeah.
Grant.
Yeah. But the fact that you guys are talking about that, the second round picks that are making people question, one of those first round picks, several of those third round picks, I think maybe is why it feels like this is the most important offseason for Terry Fontenot, Jarvis. And also, I think it's because the expectations were darn high, didn't happen, didn't kind of get close towards the end of the 2024 season. Now it's time to show and prove in 2025.
Yeah, I think this is the most important. I said, I don't care. This dude has to get this draft right. Like the mantra that I'm setting the expectation for this doggone offseason for the Falcons. Damn it. IID. That's the doggone mantra in this draft. Immediate impact on defense. Like it has to happen. Like I'm talking about immediate impact. And you're more likely to find immediate impact players in those first couple of rounds. Now, granted, you just listed all the second round players that are they even going to talk to Richard Grant about resigning? You know what I'm saying? Like that's a second round pick, and you're not even thinking about considering a late round pick, DeMarco Hellams. You're thinking about replacing him with him, you know? So it's just so many things that I feel Terry has missed on just from his philosophy, right? Of course, in a offensive quarterback driven league, you'll go for the Drake Londons and the Bijan Robinson, the Kyle Pitts of the world, right? I get it. But here's the thing: there's a way how you construct the team, and now you're sitting here with your pants down because one, you got this big blockage, right? You got diarrhea of the salary cap with Kirk Cousins because you don't know what's going to happen with that, right? Because he has a no trade clause. Aaron and I have talked about it on Locked On Falcons a lot. You know, we talked about it on Sports Extra as well about what they're going to do, you know, with Kirk Cousins. And ultimately, they have to wait and see. So now that you have to wait and see on that situation, you don't know what the backside corner looks like. You don't know. You don't know what your strong safety looks like. You only have 2 outside linebackers on your roster under contract for 2025. Oh, yeah, you brought in Jeff Ulbrich, and you're more than likely going to switch to a 4-3. So what does that look like for Arnie Ebiketie? You know what I'm saying? He's going to be a situational guy like he was when Ryan Nielsen was the defensive coordinator. He had a little bit of success, 6 sacks, right? But so it's just so many things, so many questions based off on how you constructed this roster. That's why I feel Terry, man, you got to get it right, Jack. IID. I'm telling you, bro, it's the best philosophy to have going into this draft and into the offseason.
Yeah, and Aaron, Kirk Cousins and that saga may be why it's the most important, because we look back at the Matt Ryan debacle, right? And the fact that that was something that really weighed heavily on the Falcons for a couple of years before they could really get free of it. So even starting before you go out and decide how you're going to approach the draft, how you're going to approach free agency in the offseason, all of that might be predicated on this being the most important offseason for Terry because of how he's able to manage or not manage Kirk Cousins saga.
Yeah, I talked about that earlier this week on Locked On Falcons, where I basically pleaded personally to Terry Fontenot, please go out there and use that first week of free agency to sign players so that if and when Kirk Cousins asks for his release and gets released that week, that's not the only topic that we're talking about. We can just say, oh, yeah, and the Falcons cut Kirk Cousins today. But anyway, what about this big signing on defense? What about this linebacker? What about the safety corner? Oh, isn't it exciting to see the Falcons infusing talent into this defense for once, being proactive as they did 2 years ago? Again, the relationship between signing free agents and the improvement that we saw in the defense and Ryan Nielsen, it's synergy, baby. It's working together. You look at Jeff Ulbrich and his success in New York, that first year in New York, 2021. They were the worst defense in the NFL. They go out the next offseason. They go out there, they draft Sauce Gardner. They go out there and they draft Jermaine Johnson. They get big improvements from internal players like Quinnen Williams and others and whatnot. They get big boosts and all that stuff. So it's like, like you want to improve a defense from worst to first, like you go out there and you add good players. And so I think this is definitely the most important offseason for Terry Fontenot. He's been here for 4 years. The Falcons have had 0 winning seasons. You can't say that about Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas Dimitroff had 4 winning seasons in his first 4 years. Rich point. McKay had 1 winning season right away his first year in Atlanta. Even Dan Reeves, who's probably the worst general manager that the Falcons have ever had, but a great head coach, but terrible GM, still had a successful season in his second year taking the Falcons to the Super Bowl. So I sit here and I go, Terry, you got to do something this offseason because, my God, man, we cannot go 5 years without you having a winning season and think that you're going to continue to keep your job at this point in time. So he has to hit it hard as Jarvis has said, as Maria said, you got to get immediate impact players in the draft. You got to go out there and get difference makers in free agency. And hopefully that will distract us from whatever happens with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, maybe if Jeff Ulbrich has a little bit of a seat at the table, he can tell them about guys like Quinnen Williams and how much of a difference maker he actually is. So hopefully, maybe that'll be one of the biggest things that Jeff Ulbrich brings to the table, seeing what success and what a transformational player actually looks like on the defensive side of the ball. But you guys talked about two things, free agency and draft picks for Terry Fontenot, how important they're going to be. Well, a list just came out that said, hey, the Falcons may already have a top 50 free agent. Whew, we'll talk about that when we come back on the other side. Hey, Jarvis, did I read this correctly that ESPN just came out with their top 50 free agents and Drew Dalman was rated the top center available? If I read that right, that means Terry Fontenot has a decision to make. How high, however, should it be on his list of priorities to look at Drew Dalman's contract and put that in as a priority to retain Dalman at center in the offseason?
It has to be high, right? Just from a continuity, not familiarity, right? We saw
Those are two
that
different
offensive
things.
line,
Yes.
right? It's two totally different things. They had some success with him at center, him being there, right? You don't have to worry about injuries for the most part. Like Drew Dalman has been fairly healthy throughout once he became a starter with his team. So when you talk about a mid-round pick, getting those type of starts, being in these conversations, that's the type of stuff that you need to do on the defensive side of the ball up front, right? So I feel like this should be a priority. I don't see him going anywhere unless somebody just offer him some poop ton of money. I don't necessarily feel like he would warrant that type of money. I don't see that happening. So I feel like they'll be able to come to an agreement on a solid contract for him, a nice raise for him. So yeah, I feel like you have to have a guy like that with that many stars and being that solid of a player and being that glue for both sides of of that offensive line for this team. And he's been solid ever since he took over as starter.
Yeah, that's one thing, Aaron. It's one of those things when you're on the offensive side of the ball or on the O-line, we actually don't want to hear your name. So the fact that we don't hear Drew Dalman's name very often, whether it's the false start situation or offsides or anything like that, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And as long as he has solid grades from like your Pro Football Focus or some of those other evaluation mechanisms, that's fine. But to hear that he's one of the top 50 free agents coming into this offseason, and like you said, we'll use the right word, which is continuity. That's something that's going to be critical potentially for Michael Penix Jr., for Zach Robinson, and really for that O-line overall. So what do you think when you look at the priorities, so many of them for Terry Fontenot, what do you think about where Dalman should stack up?
Yeah, I think Dalman should be at the top of the priorities when it comes to re-signing the Falcons' own free agents. I can't think of another free agent that I would sit here and say, oh, that guy definitely needs to come back. There are guys that I think
Not
certainly...
Richie Grant. I tell you that much.
All right, Travis.
All right.
Richie Grant just sitting there at home is like, man, what did I do?
What
But
did I do? Right.
but no, I think like there are other
straight
guys that deserve to come back, and certainly the Falcons should be interested in. But in terms of like prioritizing, being like, hey, if we lose this guy in free agency, and I know, T, the way that you said Drew Dalman, you're like, Drew Dalman, and it just cracked me up because it's like Drew Dalman is not that type of like household name, but he's just steady, right? And when you have a first-year starting quarterback and Michael Penix, that center position is so critical when it comes to calling out protections. And with 3 years of success that Drew Dalman has had here in Atlanta, being able to do that and being that sort of stabilizing force on the middle of the offensive line, it makes a ton of sense as we're talking about with the continuity and whatnot. And so if you lose that player, that becomes a position of priority that you need to replace. And going out there on the market, as this list is saying, like there's not a better center in free agency. And then you're trusting in the draft to get that guy to hit right away. And that's not, maybe there's a Creed Humphrey in this year's draft class, but the chances of you landing that guy is very, very low. So that sort of means to me that the Falcons should prioritize bringing Drew Dalman. Hopefully they can get him on a little bit of a discount as opposed to, paying $10 million a year, which seems to kind of be the going market rate for now for quality starting centers. And so hopefully they can get him on a little bit of a discount from that due to, saying what Jarvis said, where he has missed a couple of games the last couple of years. Like he missed 7 games this year and like 3 last year due to injury. And so, maybe you don't need to have to pay the premium just because he has missed a little bit of time at this point. But I do think re-signing Drew Dalman is a priority.
Yeah. And Maria, let's face it, you can't get an Alex Mack every single time. Like you're not going to have Alex Mack and then the replacement of Alex Mack being the second coming of Alex Mack. You have somebody in Drew Dalman who, like I said, he's solid, 78 out of 100. That's what he typically averages with Pro Football Focus. And, the bottom line is, again, Drew Dalman is solid. And sometimes in these positions, especially because you don't have the good fortune of being able to draft a center in the first or second round, you've got way too many other priorities. So what are you going to get in later rounds that could hit the ground running like a Drew Dalman? But that said, where do you feel he should be on the list of priorities for Terry Fontenot?
For me, solid and steady, especially on the offensive line, is kind of what you want. And like you said, Alex Mack, those don't really come around a lot. And Drew's been really good. And he's probably one of the few hits for Terry Fontenot when it comes to the later rounds of the draft. He was a 4th round draft pick. This really worked out for Terry. It's really worked out for the Falcons. And so I think your priority is really high, and put emphasis on the fact that he is the best available free agent at the center position, because that just tells you it is thin out there. And there are a lot of teams that are center needy, that are offensive line needy. So he's going to get his fair share of looks in free agency, and he'll be able to dip his toes in the water. And there are perhaps teams that can pay him more money than the Falcons. Who knows? And I know that he had expressed some interest in coming back to Atlanta, which is great because you want continuity at the offensive line position. You want it to be steady. And so I think in terms of priority, it's got to be high on Terry's list. As you mentioned, there's plenty of other things for him to do and to focus on, but getting that off the table and getting that off the books, I think, should be incredibly high for him. Drew had that ankle injury early in the season, but ever since he came back, he's consistently very good. I mean, you really don't have any issues with Drew, and that's kind of just what you want, especially up front and in the trenches. So I'm all about putting this at a high priority list for Terry Fontenot, because he really needs to focus on the defensive side of the ball. And so get your continuity and your consistency and a good center back, and don't worry about how the heck you're going to fill that, whether that's in free agency, which clearly will not be as good as Drew Dalman, or potentially in the draft, which again, this one hit 4th round draft pick, and this one was good, but that's a dime a dozen for sure.
Yeah. And it's not a draft as well, or even free agency for that matter, where we've heard there's going to be that kind of, dare I say it, game-changing, franchise-altering type of center like an Alex Mack. So I think if you're not faced with that kind of opportunity to pick that guy, then I think, you do stick with a Drew Dalman, because again, and I was thinking about this too, Jarvis, as you were mentioning, the possibility, or maybe it was Aaron mentioning the possibility of kind of getting a hometown discount. And I'm thinking that could be very viable. The one thing that we can give Terry Fontenot a compliment for is, in some ways you might say, okay, look at what they signed or re-signed Caleb McGarry for, but it was still a bit of a steal relative to what the market was bearing at that time. So maybe they could get the same for Drew Dalman.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's possible because, like you said, continuity matters. Like offensive line, like you talked about this T all the time. That is a special group of guys, right? Like you have to
My
be
favorite.
big, aggressive, but patient. And most of the time those are the most cerebral guys. I played on the defensive line, so you know how I am. So y'all know I didn't play offensive line. I was like, hey, go get ball, take on this double team, beat this man in front of you, and go get the running back. Like, I love that transparency, right? Just being straight direct. But offensive line, they have to think about so many more things when it comes to, especially that center spot, to be able to say, hey, Here's what the protection is. I can identify it. You don't have to worry about that. Let me handle that. You handle what your reads are and what the coverage is showing and all that stuff. So I feel like that is a safe space for a young quarterback like Michael Penix, like Free pointed out earlier. So for me, I really feel like this is one of those situations where you have to kind of honor that. And I feel like he wants to honor that as well because of the cohesion that he has with guys like Bergeron and Chris Lindstrom and, of course,
Yeah.
Caleb McGarry and Jake, the wily veteran. So all those guys really, really like each other. That's why it shows on the field because they're such a cohesive unit.
Offensive
Yeah,
line
yeah.
matters. Look at what the Eagles' offensive line has done. I mean, they are literally setting the blueprint for what it means to take an offensive line to the next level. And this offensive line, because of the consistency and continuity, that's why they've been able to be successful. I wouldn't understand completely blowing up certain aspects of the offensive line when you're giving Michael Penix Jr. the ball for really the first full season of his career.
Yeah, that's a great call because we didn't necessarily have this conversation even when Kirk Cousins, not as mobile, was in under center at QB1 where he was fighting for his life. Where he was fighting for his life each and every week. And I think Maria makes a great point. You want to see something like a Jalen Hurts situation or even a Patrick Mahomes situation for the most part, where when there's a solid O-line, you get better play out of your quarterback as opposed to what we saw for players like poor CJ Stroud and how he looked over and over and over again this past postseason. So yeah, that's a great point. The continuity does matter. But like we said, it's going to be intriguing because one of the other things that's going to say, Terry Fontenot, you're on the hot seat, is what he does in this draft. And of course, we already know there are pundits saying where the Falcons will go, what Terry needs to do. We'll talk about that when we come back. Well, Aaron, it is January 23rd, and I think we are at our 277th version of the mock draft for 2025. So I think that it's okay for us to get into it now because we're already there. Of course, Mel Kiper released, they say it's his first mock draft, but I don't know. I think it's probably his 277th. That's just me. And he had the Falcons taking Shemar Stewart out of Texas A&M in the first round. You heard that right. First round, Texas A&M, Shemar. Okay, just so we're clear, he said that he's going to take Shemar Stewart in the first round. But it's early in the draft process, so this changes over the course of the next few months. It's going to change over and over and over again, although we certainly hope that one of the things it doesn't do is kind of change into somebody on the offensive side of the ball, dare I say. But that said, what do you think about that? Did Kiper get it right in talking about the Falcons taking the D lineman out of College Station? Is this finally going to be the year where we get to cheer after they say with the first, the 15th pick in the NFL draft of 2025, the Atlanta Falcons select? Are we going to be excited this time? Finally relieved? I don't know, something.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. Like I set my expectations really low when it comes to the Falcons in the draft. I'm just like, we'll see what happens. But I do think with Shemar Stewart, who's expected to be at the Senior Bowl, although Jarvis and I were talking on Twitter the other day, it was like the more mock drafts that put him in the top 15, the less likely he's going to practice at the Senior Bowl. It's like, what? Why do I don't need to be here. So hopefully he doesn't read Mel Kiper's mock draft. But I do think Shemar Stewart is an interesting prospect. He's got a lot of size. He's got a lot of physicality. That's the type of prospect that tends to rise in this draft process. We saw this happen a couple of years with Trayvon Walker. I don't think Shemar Stewart is quite on Trayvon Walker's level as a freak athlete to rise to the level of being a number one pick, but it would not shock me at all if Shemar Stewart wound up being a top 10 pick by the time we got to April because of, NFL teams love big, long dudes that can run really fast and get after the quarterback. So I think Shemar Stewart makes sense for the Falcons, especially if they are going to move to a 4-3 defense. I think he's that sort of big, heavy, physical end that when you want to play with light boxes, as so many teams want to do, and something that the Jets did consistently under Jeff Ulbrich in New York, you need to have bigger, heavier edges. We saw this with Ryan Nielsen a couple of years ago with Calais Campbell and Zach Harrison. So Shemar Stewart kind of fits that type of mold of player. And so, having another player like that in Atlanta certainly wouldn't hurt. But the concerns about Shemar Stewart is, despite his tools and traits, he's maybe a couple of years away from being able to hone that into being that difference maker up front. So that's probably the one question I would have about this specific prospect in selection. Of, you would hope that the Falcons, if they're going to take a pass rusher, can get a guy that is going to be an instant impact guy. Obviously, everybody looks at someone like Jared Verse, who's the unanimous defensive rookie of the year, immediately coming in and having success. I don't know if there's a Jared Verse in this draft class, but you're searching for that guy, and I don't know if Shemar Stewart is that guy either.
Hey, Free, don't trigger Jarvis. Please don't trigger Jarvis. Don't trigger Jarvis by saying
you did the entire time you were talking.
Yeah.
I just kept thinking, like, Jarvis hates everything he's saying right now.
I don't see. Here's the thing, right? I don't hate everything he said. Free makes
just most of it.
He has an excellent opinion when it comes to draft eval and looking at guys. We have conversations off camera and off air or whatever about all of the prospects and what we think about them. And
I just thought
it's
Jared
okay
Verse was gonna trigger you.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, but Shemar Stewart triggered me, right?
Because I know you don't like him. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, so Maria, you are correct in that manner.
know.
I thought you were talking about me.
No. I know that you hated everything he was saying because you do not agree with Shemar being the pick at 15.
Oh, I thought he actually tapped out because once he heard Jared Verse, he's like, no, la 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 la. Because he's so traumatized at where Jared Verse.
No, I just knew he's way out on Shemar, but go ahead.
Yes, I'm not way out. Here's the thing. Here's what I see from Shemar Stewart, right? I feel like he's a 5 technique guy, a 3-4 type defensive end type situation. And being that they're going to a 4-3, I don't feel like he'll be a good fit. And when you talk about the pass rush ability, I feel like he leaves a lot to be desired, in my humble opinion. Because he likes to get into guys and tackles and get up, and then there's some plays where he kind of all up in the guy's face, like, yeah, I pushed you back. I'm like, man, the play over there, quarterback running over there, dude. Like, what are you doing? Like, you know what I'm saying? So, he see, so I'm more focused on guys who have the tools to be able to get to the quarterback along with that size. Now, 6'6", 290, if I saw that, I would be too excited about Mr. Stewart coming down here. Then he got some goals in the mouth. So, hey, man, I talk about the whole dad-daughter dating situation. I was like, I don't know if I'll let Shemar Stewart date my daughter. You know what I'm saying? I need those type of dudes on my squad. But however, if you can't show me that you can consistently work your moves, know what you're doing before the ball is snapped, when it's on 3rd and long, but there were situations where he, in that Notre Dame game, where they took him out in pass rush situations, right? Whether it be for tired or, they have another guy that's an edge player that I actually like, 11, I think Nick Scrouton, I think his name is. So, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about, right? Because he's big enough to be able to hold it down in that base when they are in base, because you're not in there that much. But, yeah, Shemar Stewart is not that guy for me because of, I understand where Kiper is talking about, 10, 12 sack guy. Yeah, man, like 3 years from now, Falcons ain't got that much time. I'm sorry. IID, baby. IID.
So, Maria, what are your thoughts on Shemar Stewart as the guy who could be the immediate game changer for this Falcons team? Did Mel Kiper get it right?
I mean, I don't know if Mel was just not really focused on the Falcons, but I don't agree with this at all. However, I also don't think that Shemar Stewart's going to be who the Falcons pick. So, I think they need someone who just can give a lot more productivity. And Shemar certainly didn't do that in college. His sack numbers were not where you would want them to be for someone you would pick in the first round and for someone who would make an immediate impact on defense like we're talking about the Falcons need. I've seen so many mock drafts, like you said, there's 4,000 out there and it's only late January. And one of them had Jalen Walker at 15. However, I don't think that Jalen's going to be there at 15. I think he's going to go before then. Jalen's terrific. He's so versatile, and I think that he would be someone that could be an immediate impact player anywhere he plays. That would be a dream. Although the Falcons don't really love to pay attention to the Georgia Bulldogs all that much. But Jalen Walker is incredibly versatile. And really any defender that Kirby Smart is going to.
Can we kill that narrative this year? Can we kill that narrative this year? Can we kill that narrative this year?
Oh, the Georgia,
Can we kill the narrative of Georgia players, right? If there's a guy that wore red and black in college, and played ball in Athens,
keep him in the same colors.
Take him, especially if he can have an impact for your team.
Well, honestly, and to me, like the defensive players that are coming out of Kirby Smart's defense, like he makes them be as versatile as humanly possible. And he's so good at that and so good at developing NFL talent. And look, I'm not a Georgia fan. I just cover the team. And so I know, and I've watched these players very closely. You know, these are guys that come out of college NFL ready immediately. Is Shemar Stewart a guy that's NFL ready immediately? No, I think, and that's why I disagree with that. I just think he's more of a project. And like Jarvis said, and like Aaron has said, you know, the Falcons, it's a ticking time clock, really, you know, especially for Terry Fontenot. You're up against the clock, and a guy like Shemar is not really going to help you in any way, shape, or form with that.
Yeah. You know who keeps a close eye on those Georgia Bulldogs? A team that's looking to go to the Super Bowl 2 years out of the last 3 in the Philadelphia Eagles. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen, along with his occasional guest analyst, Jarvis Davis. And check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra on Sundays on 11 Alive. We'll see you next time.